I've never acted, really. I acted once.
Do you want to try now? Do you want me to give you an exercise?
Am I not?
Who are you really?
Aren't we all, Sarah,
you?
if you really think about it, man? Sarah.
Hi.
How are you?
Really good. How about you?
I'm not too bad. Congratulations on the film.
Thank you.
Nomination for Best Screenplay from the Golden Globes. Nomination for Best Direction from the Critics' Choice Awards. And then the Boston Film Critics Association.
Yeah, you're getting the good one now.
Gives you Best Ensemble Cast, which you share with the cast of Jackass Forever.
Yeah, and then that's all you ever need to be happy in life, is only that.
I just think that's the greatest thing.
It's so good.
What did you make of that?
I was thrilled. I felt like it gave our film some kind of credibility with regular audiences. No, I do feel like, I don't know, I thought it was delightful. I thought it was a delightful reveal to have those two casts. And our cast really wants to go out for dinner now with the Jackass Forever team. And they haven't responded. And I think that's because they know secretly deep down in their hearts that we're more fun than they are. And they don't want to come to terms with that.
I think they know that you can do the stunts better than they can.
Everything. Certainly the jokes. Have you seen women talking?
I wonder. Well, yeah, I wonder how many people have seen both Jackass Forever and Women Talking.
I'm the kind of person who would I spent last night watching Billy Madison for the 800th time. I am the target audience for that pairing.
Conditioner is better.
Yeah.
I have seen.
That was really good evidence and recall.
Thank you very much. I have seen both Jackass Forever and Women Talking.
Nice.
Yeah,
there
I am
you
the
go.
one.
So you are. It's you and me.
And I'm not going to lie to you, I loved them both.
Nice.
I loved them both.
And for the same reasons.
I mean, we could do that. I probably could do that.
I think you could do it.
I could do that, but why do it? How was working with an ensemble on this? It did make me think. When I saw the Best Ensemble thing, and I was thinking about the film, it's a lot of actors. It's a lot of actors in the same scene for a long time, and quite an ensemble in it. How was that for you?
It was amazing because I got to cast the people who are, in my mind, the best actors working in the world. And not just the best actors in the world, but they created such an amazing community with each other and were so selfless and so amazing at making space for each other. And it was intimidating at first, but that really quickly faded just into gratitude for getting to work with this group of people.
How do you mean they created a community with one another?
Everyone was kind of there to support everyone else. And it started to feel like it was the summer where the Canadian women's soccer team was really, in the news a lot. And we were watching all of these clips of them jumping up and down and holding each other up, after they scored goals. And that's what it felt like being on set. Someone would give an amazing monologue and it would be a great take and everyone would just rush at them and hug them and cry. And it just felt like everyone was sort of cheering for everyone else and everyone was giving their performance full tilt, full emotional levels for everyone else's off camera. And sometimes people would be off camera for 3 and 4 days at a time before we ever got around to them because the scenes were so long. There are so many characters. So it took a kind of egolessness and a sense of community building that, all of those people participated in to make this film. And so I kept sending around these montages of the Canadian women's soccer team because it would just remind me so much of this sense of people would score a goal and everyone would be part of it and everyone would feel that, they were winning as a team.
Is that rare?
Yeah. It's really rare, sadly. First of all, it's rare just to have this big a cast where this many people have important roles. So the structure of itself was rare. But I think that sense of camaraderie and that sense of people being willing to make space and treating other people's victories as their own is rare. And we were really conscious when we were putting together this team of casting people not just for their ability to play the part, but also for their ability to have those kinds of relationships where they could step back and make space.
I mean, that's lovely. I've never acted, really. I acted once.
Do you want to try now? Do you want me to give you an exercise?
Am I not?
Who are you really?
Aren't we all, Sarah,
you?
if you really think about it, man? It's a fake joint. But I did act this year. Oh. And I found out I acted in a thing this year. I played myself.
What?
Tom.
What did you do?
It was like a CBC gym thing.
Okay. Were you good as yourself or would you have preferred to be played by somebody else?
I thought I'd be better, to be candid. I thought I'd be better.
All right.
Thinking they were like, just be yourself. You're Tom, host a Q. And I was like, hi,
Oh, no.
Well,
Amazing.
right? But I didn't know that, I can't believe I'm saying this to you, given your career, that there is this thing that has to happen when you are acting and they're doing a close-up on somebody else. Is this like me saying the ABCs to you, by the way?
No.
So they're doing a close-up on, for people who don't know this, because I didn't know this. You're in a scene, me and Sarah are in a scene together. They've shot the scene in the wide, and me and Sarah are talking to one another, and then they zoom in on Sarah, and I'm acting with Sarah off screen. And I said to the person, I said, do I still have what do I do here? Do I just read the lines, or do I just, and they said, the great ones, the generous ones are the ones who still give it their all, even when they're not on screen. And that's what came to mind when you said that. These actors, your Frances McDormands, your Rooney Maras, these like high-level actors, there's something to that, right?
Yeah, and in the case of this film, it was a bit of a strange creature because we had these scenes that sometimes last 10 and 15 minutes, and there are these wild debates, and people are incredibly emotional and angry and laughing uncontrollably, and so much happens in these very long scenes. And we had 12 people sometimes to shoot. It would sometimes take us 3 to 4 days to get around the room and finish the scene. So by the time, Claire or Jesse or Rooney had done, or Sheila McCarthy or Judith Ivey had done their most difficult moments, some of which were monologues that went on for long pages, they would have done it 120 times, literally. I mean, we once counted, Claire did a monologue 120 times, full tilt, crying, screaming, and never did it less for anyone else's coverage than she did for her own. And that went for everybody on that set. Nobody ever gave less when they were off camera.
Is that rare?
I think that's rare to have 12 people who do that. Yeah, I think great actors, for the most part, will know they need to do that, but you don't usually have to do it for that long and that many takes, because usually there's a scene with 2 or 3 people, not 12.
Yeah.
So the kind of stamina and technical ability and endurance this required was really abnormal, and it would be abnormal to find 12 people who would be both willing and capable of giving everything they had for every single take for everybody else.
It speaks to me of, like, I've read a lot about the environment you tried to create on the set, right? Like that, it speaks to me of that environment. You wanted to create one that was trusting, that was collective.
Yeah, I mean, that was the intention. I think we had a lot of focus on making sure it was a good experience for people, that it was a healthy working environment, that our working hours were not as long as usual in the film industry, that people could get home to see their kids at night. We had a rule that if people needed a break or 20 minutes, we would take one no matter what. People very rarely asked for that, but we just wanted to get rid of that emergency room mentality that film sets can have, that I think are so unproductive and kind of unhealthy at their core. We had an on-set therapist for the scenes that were most difficult for people emotionally. She was with us. Her name was Dr. Lori Haskell. She's an amazing clinical psychologist who specializes in memory and what trauma does to the brain and sexual assault. And so she was with us at the beginning in terms of helping us develop tools to deal with stuff that might come up, was there for the actors and the crew when things came up on set, and was just a resource that was invaluable. So we just tried to put guardrails in place. We had a rule when kids were on set that if things got uncomfortable or even a bit boring, they could just leave and we would have to work around it. So I think just trying to create an environment that addressed some of the things that had been difficult for me as an actor and growing up was enormously helpful for me personally, but also it creates a kind of optimism to realize things can be different. And I think the guiding principle of this novel is, thinking about, I don't want to say guiding principle, I don't want to speak for Miriam, but what I took away from it that was important to me was this idea of thinking about what we want to build, not just what we want to tear down, and what we'd like to see.
Yeah. So, I think the book gets misrepresented as a book about women deciding or not they're going to leave or stay and fight. It's about women deciding if they're going to leave and create something better. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I do. And I think another sort of mistaken assumption about the book and the film is that it's this very heavy, devastating, difficult material. And the background
funny.
is, it's funny, it's joyful. It's about creating a better world.
Yeah.
It's about what could be different and how capable we are of sitting with each other and coming to a way forward with people we might not agree on every issue with, which is, I think, something that's getting lost in the conversation generally. So I find it a tremendously hopeful enterprise. I felt the book left me with so many open-ended and exciting questions, and that's what we tried to bring into the spirit of the film.
How did the book come to you?
So somebody at my book club took me aside in the kitchen and said, I know what the next film you need to direct is. I just read this book.
You're in a book club?
Oh, yeah. It's like the great joy of my life.
I feel like you'd be an intimidating presence in a book club.
Not in my book club.
Really?
Yeah, no. My book club is full of people that I kind of idolize. I'm terrified of just because of how amazing and brilliant they are. And I don't...
Of course not. But like
Yeah.
other writery, actory people, arty people?
People from all kinds of different professions. There are some writers. There's a historian, a judge, a publisher. Like, it's a really interesting group of women who are all older than I am, and I kind of lobbied to get into it for quite a few years before I was accepted. It was I just wore them down.
Paid a fee.
They finally just got tired, and so I got to join. But just an amazing group of women to get to listen to talk. And someone took me aside in the kitchen and just said, I'm going to tell you the background of this book, and you're not going to want to make it, but I need you to know this is the background. It's not what actually happens in the book. The background is this series of assaults that took place over years and years. And I was like, I don't want to make that. And then she said, no, I said you were going to say that. But the book itself is about this amazing conversation that happens amongst this group of women who are elected to make a decision about whether or not to stay and fight, whether or not to leave, whether or not to stay and do nothing, and how they might create a new colony or not. And it's this incredible debate and this amazing democratic exercise, and it's a pressure cooker. They only have 24 hours to decide before the men come back. And by the end of this description, I was hooked. And I hadn't thought of directing in 10 or 11 years since I had kids. And I immediately ran out and got the book and just became obsessed by it, and how just amazingly huge the questions that Miriam asks us in this book are. And so I found out that Frances McDormand and Dee Dee Gardner had the rights. I reached out to them, and the very same day they reached out to me, which was thrilling.
And what'd they say?
I just got this email forwarded from my manager, Frank, who's also Fran's manager, and it just said, women talking was the subject line, and it just said, what's Sarah Polley up to these days? And I had just sent him an email saying, do you know if they have a writer-director for this book yet?
Were you trepidatious about taking on a film at all? Like you said, like it had been a while.
Yeah, I had all kinds of fear around it. I have 3 little kids. I didn't really want to miss the amount of time that you miss when you make a film. Usually you miss them waking up and going to bed for months and months at a time. So that was a big fear, which was quickly resolved by Dee Dee and Fran quickly agreeing to making shorter working hours so that none of us would have to miss that part of our lives completely during this shoot. I was also frightened because I'd had a head injury. I'd had a concussion that I suffered with on and off for 3.5 years. And I didn't actually know if I could direct a film again. But I knew I desperately wanted to bring this story to the screen, and it was worth a try. But there was a certain amount of fear in it, for sure.
When did you talk to Miriam first?
I talked to Miriam as soon as I was hired, and I asked to go out with her and just ask her every question I'd wanted to ask about the book, which is the most thrilling part about adaptation.
Yeah.
If you get to do it, I got to do that with Margaret Atwood as well, as every question you've ever had about a book you love to just get to sit with the author and ask it.
Can you tell me anything you might have asked her?
The biggest question I had, that is my favorite question to ask now when I adapt, is if there's one thing that is the most deeply important to you about the translation of this work of yours to the screen, what is it? And what's interesting is authors have an answer to that really quickly usually. And Miriam's right away was the laughter, that these women have to laugh and it has to be funny. And that was really amazing guiding principle to have, because there has to be an escape valve. There has to be there has to be a release, I think, for so much of what you're made to feel in this film. The women need that. There's an intimacy that develops with these women when they're in community with each other and there are no men around and they're able to talk about this trauma and this harm, but also how to move forward. There's a joy that had to seep into the film. So whenever we could find a place for laughter, we did. And Miriam really helped us find that as a North Star.
Right. So Miriam, she is saying to you, if I understand correctly, like there is a version of this story that is only the trauma and assault and rape that these women have gone through, and the oppression and assault these women have gone through, not just for their own lives, but for the generations before them.
Yeah.
And if you're not you specifically, but like what she would be worried about when she said it to you is that that's the only thing that it's about.
Yeah.
That it's not about the love or the joy or the fooling around.
Yeah. And I think that the idea of having that love and that ability to laugh and that sense of connection with each other, that idea that has to be such a major player in all of the proceedings of this film really gave it the texture, I think, that was, so necessary for even just to be able to ask an audience to go to this film. I think it's really important that there be space to feel many different things.
The film makes you think about a lot of things that are not the film. Like the film obviously makes you think about a lot of things in our current society and sure, fully want to talk to you about that. But when I read the book and watched the film, I was struck by Miriam coming from a Mennonite community. And again, this film is not, it is almost like I think I've heard you call it like a fable. It's a story that can be applied to a lot of different parts of our life. But it also makes me curious about maybe what you were curious about when you talked to Miriam, who did leave, her family did leave a Mennonite community. What were you interested in sort of about cloistered religious communities and what can happen at those?
Yeah, I mean, I have talked about this film as a fable, and that's certainly how I envisioned it. I don't think it's what Miriam envisioned when she wrote the book. I think that's probably where the book and the film diverge from each other a little bit. For me, it is this kind of huge, sweeping fable, almost like an allegory. I think for her, coming from a Mennonite community, it was much more like rooted in reality in some way. And it is based on a true story. I mean, like we have to remember this book was written in response to a real series of assaults that happened over years in a Mennonite community in Bolivia, the Manitoba colony. And this book is not about those assaults, but it's a response to them, a very hopeful response in a way, in terms of a way forward and a reckoning with harms and moving forward. But yes, it was deeply important to, even though we don't say the word Mennonite in the film for a whole host of reasons, it was important to us to be really authentic. We don't ever say the word Mennonite in the film.
Sarah, I never caught that.
It's said in the book. I think, first of all, my experiences with Mennonite communities have been overwhelmingly positive. I have Mennonite friends. I'm really drawn to the collectivity and selflessness in those communities, and I really wanted to represent that in the film as well as telling this story. But I'm not Mennonite, and me telling this story is different from Miriam telling this story in a certain respect. So for me, it's more in the realm of a fable, but it was also really important to me that we be very authentic, the details of what these Mennonite communities are like in terms of design and wardrobe. And we had Mennonite consultants at every step of the way. I think one of the reasons I don't use the word Mennonite also is I didn't want to give a secular audience permission to use the idea that this is happening in this already very misunderstood community. This could never happen here. Like, I want it to always feel closer than you think, because actually this is about all of us. The questions this raises about what we've allowed to have happen, the harm that we've enabled, systemic injustice, hierarchical power structures that allow terrible things to take place, and violence against women. It's interesting having this conversation in the studio right now. But it is sort of the cloud hanging over the whole thing, don't you think? Let's just say the thing. So I do feel like that to me is what's most interesting and what's applicable to all of us in this room and everywhere. And so I didn't want to give a contemporary secular audience permission to say, actually, this is just something that happens in a cloistered, isolated religious community. I think the conditions can be more ripe for this kind of thing in a community like this, but we have these very difficult questions to face everywhere.
You didn't want to other it, and you didn't want people to get a break by going, oh no, this is, I mean, that's what happens to the crowd who wear bonnets. And that's what happens to the crowd who wear no more than we might say, oh, that's what happens in rural places. That's what happened. That couldn't happen here.
Yeah.
You didn't want to give people an out.
Exactly.
To not be able to look in their backyards.
Yeah. And also with this reaching this broad audience, and again, I am not Mennonite.
Yeah.
We're talking about a community of people who cannot, by its very nature, speak back. They're not going to write an op-ed. They're not going to go give interviews. They don't interact with the world, the contemporary world, in that way. So you kind of have to measure how you're telling a story about a community that is not your own, knowing that it is not on this playing field. And so one of the things that was super important to me in the film was really honoring the faith and pulling that apart from the hierarchical structures that have sprung up around that faith, so that we really honor these women's faith and how they feel about it and what their version of being a Mennonite is. And we are saying that that is separate. And in fact, much of their conversation is parsing out how is that different from this toxic, insidious structure that's built up around the religion.
Did making the film make you think about faith?
Yeah, it did a lot. I think what's beautiful is that these women have this anchor of this faith to guide them through this incredibly complex problem, and they have a language around it. I do think a lot of it becomes kind of theological at times. And I love the strength that it gives many of them to find their way forward and move towards what is good and what is just, what is honorable. They say this verse from Philippians quite a few times, of just figuring out a way forward through the prism of that faith and the best part of it.
Do you have that?
Do I have faith?
Yeah.
I wouldn't say I have a religion, but I would say that I have...
you don't have to talk about it.
I'm not sure I can put it into words. I have an enormous amount of faith in a basic goodness in human beings, to be honest with you. And I have an enormous amount of faith in people's ability to change and find a way forward. And in a way, I think that faith is so strong that it feels spiritual at times. And even if it isn't about a bigger thing, like I have an enormously strong faith in people and their ability to do good and be good.
There's a line in the film, and I don't know if it's from the book. In fact, I read the book so recently that I said I don't think it is. But when they're coming up with sort of the treaty, the manifesto for how they want the future world to be, as she said, a religion based on love is one of the things that I think Sheila McCarthy's character says. And I guess it made me think about, as we try to rebuild our society in a more equal and in a more kind and a more just way, what do you use as a stone in the ground for yourself? These women are motivated by the goodness of God and the things that there's a great line that, like, if God is benevolent, he will understand that we're leaving. So I guess the reason I wanted to know about your faith is not because I'm taking a census, but it's because, though I am, as a representative of the government, Trudeau called me and said, if you don't mind, I was also wondering, because you do strike me as someone who has an anchor somewhere of goodness. And I was wondering what that anchor is for you.
Yeah, I go in and out of being sort of more interested in actual religion and different religions all the time. But I think that for me, the consistent thing is that I've seen people survive unbelievable things and come out. I mean, there's that this thing that runs throughout the mythology of the wounded healer. I've seen that so many times in my life, of people who shouldn't be able to function because of the trauma they've experienced and are generous and good and helping others. I've also seen people who've done terrible things be accountable and take responsibility, and have a kind of self-inquiry that seems to me like the true hope in this world. I just don't think, in my personal experience, and I don't speak for anyone but myself here, I don't think of anyone as a write-off. I think there is enormous possibility for people to change and shift and be affected by each other. So I think that kind of guides every decision that I make.
Not always easy to get to that place.
No, and I think probably appropriate to feel grief and rage at times too. This is where I kind of am living right now, though, is this sense that I think human beings are capable of so much more than we think we are, and I think we can have more faith in ourselves and in each other. Yeah. And I don't think, I'm certainly not speaking from a naive place of having never experienced trauma or been harmed, but I hold out hope and faith that everyone is due for a moment, and hopefully has one in their life where they really recognize and are accountable for and commit to changing things that they've done in the past.
I wondered about that in the context of the child actors on the set, that you, of course, were a child actor. And I wonder, I mean, I guess, did you feel anything when you were working with them? Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. So I'm just basically uncomfortable with kids being on set, period.
Right.
I thought, in this film, it's necessary to have kids not as a major role. I would never make a film, I don't think, where a kid played a major role and had to make that time commitment. But it was necessary to have them in the background playing and give a sense of what these women were fighting for. I mean, they're ultimately in this conversation to fight for and protect and safeguard their children. So they had to be there, but I thought, okay, well, I'll just put literally all of my energy into making sure this is a good environment for them. So I didn't really direct them. We followed them around with a camera. We let them play. There was a speech made every day where I just said, if you get bored or uncomfortable at any time, if you just don't feel like being here anymore, you can walk out. We'll work around you. You're only allowed to be here if you're having fun. As soon as it stops being fun, there's no obligation to be here. Just tell me or your mom or whoever. So it was pretty good as far as working experiences went for kids. But what I realized in doing it was I can't control for what their home life is like and what kind of pressure is on these kids that I can't see and what they're comfortable objecting to and not at such a young age. So I don't know that I will know if this was a positive experience for these kids until they're 40 and have had a bunch of therapy. And maybe they'll come out and say it was great, but I don't think you can know that. And I think it's unfair to expect a kid to be able to properly advocate for themselves.
Well, yeah.
So,
I mean, you would know, right?
Yeah. So I'm uncomfortable with the premise. I did everything I could.
Yeah.
I think we were successful, but I just can't be assured of that.
It was funny you mentioned that, like, you said something just then, like, I would never cast a kid in a lead role. I would never do it. I got to interview Jeanette McCurdy not that long ago.
Yeah.
Have you met her yet?
No, I haven't met her, but I've seen interviews and stuff.
And a really incredible book she wrote called I'm Glad My Mom Died, about her experience as a child actor. And she said to me, Tom, she said, not only do I think there shouldn't be child actors at all, like there should not be child actors at all, but I think we as a society need to reckon with why we want child actors and what it says about our feelings towards children and our feelings towards, like, mortality. She was like, I feel like we could all use some cognitive behavioral therapy, is what she said, to figure out why we want child actors in the first place.
I think it's complicated. I mean, I've certainly held that position very strongly for long periods of time.
That there shouldn't be any.
So I get it.
Yeah.
But what I will say is, yes, we have made a decision as a society that kids will not work. Why on earth would film be the exception in terms of an industry? It makes no sense.
Yeah.
However, are we really going to see no films or TV shows without kids for the rest of our lives is the question that gets posed to me when I say that. And I'm sort of taking that in and going, okay, well, what can we do? Because actually, this isn't going to stop. Even if we're railing against it, it's not going to stop. So what can we do to ensure it's better or safer? And I mean, I think that you should limit the amount that a kid can work in a year. I think there should be really strict rules around that.
Yeah.
I think there should be a third party that has nothing to do with the kid's family or the production. I think probably there should be an on-set child psychologist at all times, anytime a kid is in a working environment, who is assessing independently whether things are going okay or not for that kid. Because I don't think anybody else in that equation can be trusted. So I think working hours should be much shorter for them. And ultimately, I would just advise, parents to say no, like let your kid have a childhood. They can work for the rest of their lives. It doesn't have to be now. And there's no statistic that backs up the idea that being a child actor is a good predictor of a healthy, happy career later. I mean, it almost never happens. So I think that making sure people are really informed about the pitfalls of it are really important. And then also having tons of safeguards on set when it does happen. But yeah, of course, my instinct is the same as hers. There shouldn't be kids working at all. But I don't think, in the absence of that being the reality, I'd like to see what we can do to make it better.
When your kids were on set for this thing, I think I should say, I think mainly because it was the pandemic and it was it was a good place for them to be, to be with you and all that. Was that occasion to look at them? And I don't know how old they are, and nor do I expect you to tell me. But is that an occasion by which you look at them and go, "Hey, youngsters, when I was your age, I was doing this in a very different way, or I was just doing this"?
Yeah, I mean, I was, my kids really wanted to come on set and they wanted to visit. And because of COVID rules, the only way someone could come on our set was if they were employed. That was a rule. And I couldn't have an exception just for me and not the rest of the crew. So they were also very interested in being background performers. So I amazingly relented on this, which nobody could believe, especially me.
That you let their...
Yeah, I mean, I just didn't understand why I was in this situation. Actually, our costume designer, Keita Alfred, who's amazing, was actually worked on Road to Avonlea when I was a kid. And she was, as she was fitting my kids in these period costumes, she was going, are you sure? This seems like actually the last thing you would want to have happen. This is so surreal. But, of course, I made my speeches every day about if you're bored, you don't have to stay. And at some point, my oldest kid intervened and just said, everyone's having a good time. This is about your childhood. You need to relax. So it's basically like summer camp here. Everyone's happy.
Your oldest kid said, everyone's having a good time. This is about you.
Yeah. No, the exact words of my oldest kid were, we know, stop boring us with your childhood, which you need to absorb and take in.
Can I laugh at that? Am I allowed to laugh at that?
You're allowed to laugh at that. You're allowed to laugh at everything.
Well, I don't know if I'm allowed to laugh
literally
at
everything.
Well, I don't know. But how was that for you how was that for you?
I mean, good in the sense that I realized, okay, we're not damaging anybody here. But also you realize, we're all lugging our baggage along with us. And we got to be conscious of that as well. I think the least fun part of the experience of being on that set for those kids was me being neurotic about whether or not they should be there and worrying about their well-being. Yeah. But at the same time, better than the alternative. So
yeah, and of course you would, right?
Yeah.
A couple of things we were talking about in the office with regards to this film, a couple of choices that I wanted to ask you about. In the Miriam Toews book, August, the male school teacher, is the narrator. In your version, is it Ocha? Is that her name? The 16-year-old daughter who is speaking to a future child. Just talk to me a little bit about that decision.
Yeah, so in the book, August, Ben Wishaw's character, is the narrator, and it works beautifully in the book. And I love that Miriam gave him the narration. We're sort of reading the minutes that he's taking of these women's meeting. And it's so beautifully done in the book. And I assumed that would work similarly in the film. I wrote it that way. We shot it that way. We recorded the voiceover. And then in the edit, it became clear that in the translation of this story to this different medium, not having the story told through the voice of one of the women who had been assaulted created this distance between us and the story. And we were so taken by Kate Hallett, who plays Oche. She's an amazing 16-year-old actress who is from Alberta, and this is her very first film. And we had been so taken with her throughout the rehearsal and the film, and so wanted her to be more central. And so suddenly we started to imagine the voiceover being through Oche, and rewrote the narration for her and kind of reconstructed the film around the voice of the youngest person in the room. And that was an amazing experience, both to get to write that voiceover and also get to hear Kate's voice become central to the film.
You nor Miriam depict the violence, the actual violence to the women in either the novel or the film. Can you talk to me a little bit about that?
Sure. I mean, the book and the film are about the way that these women have moved alongside this trauma, processed it, come together in community to figure out how to respond to it and alongside it and find a way forward. The dwelling on the details of the assaults themselves felt both gratuitous and also really besides the point of what the film was about.
And the sort of the last sort of in-office observation was that, obviously on this show we've been thinking a lot about it, just given that we've been covering it through the years, but we're 5 years out from Me Too now, I believe. Mm-hmm. But not just in the entertainment industry, but in journalism, in nursing, in agriculture. Like there's ideally a reckoning happening in all these industries and that have been happening at the same time. And you said something like it earlier when I was talking to you a little bit about the Mennonite part. But I read this quote about you, and it said, you said, someone asked you about this, and you said, this movie is about refocusing ourselves on what we want to build and how to get there rather than what we want to destroy. Mm-hmm. And I suppose I wanted to see if we could get you to talk a little bit more about that, a little bit more about sort of the allegorical nature of the film.
Sure. I mean, I think that we've done a lot of really important work of pointing out harms that have been done and developing a language around that. Developing a language around what sexual assault and what sexual harassment looks like. I think that's been a lot of the conversation. It's been an important one. I think that we also need to now spend as much time thinking about what it is that we do want to see. And there is this line in the film that's from the book where Rooney Mara's character says, Ona, she says, perhaps we need to talk about what it is we want to build, not only what it is we want to destroy. And for me, the project of this film and for me, the impact of the book was it gave me an off-ramp from grief and rage and into this sense of using our imaginations to imagine what a just and equitable world might look like and to meditate on what is good and what we could build. I think we're also this funny moment in this conversation where both the conversation itself is starting to stagnate and also we're in the middle of a tremendous blowback where people are just sick of it. They don't want to hear about equity anymore. Mm-hmm. I mean, we've only been in the conversation for 5 minutes and people are done.
That's enough. Yeah.
Yeah. Like, okay, you had your moment. Yeah, it's time to sit down and be quiet again. Yeah. So it's a funny moment where I think there's tremendous possibility because there has been the beginning of this reckoning with the harm that's been done. And so I think it allows us an opportunity to now think about what next, what do we want to build. But we're also in the middle of also just needing to kind of hold our ground as well and say, this conversation actually does have to continue because there's so much work to be done. And while there may be some superficial shifts and changes, especially, in the film industry for female actors, in terms of the rest of the world, there's so far that we still have to go. So
it's a really beautiful film, Sarah.
Thank you.
I hope you keep making them. I hope you keep making films,
Thank you. I'd like to.
I hope so. I mean, I think I did see one quote with you. You were like, I don't know if I'll ever make another one after this, but.
Well, I think I just have to feel like something matters this much. I mean, I love writing and I write for a living when I'm not making films. And in terms of what it takes to actually make a film, I guess I just want to feel as urgent about it as I do about this one. And I felt like what Miriam Toews does in this book, she's saying something that I hadn't heard said before. And so to get to be a part of, translating that into another medium was a huge opportunity that made it worthwhile to make a film.
Well, we feel so much admiration for you here.
Thank you.
And so much love for you here, too.
Thank you.
And I'm glad you came in.
I'm glad I came in, too.
It's always nice.
Postmodern and cathartic.
That's the tagline.
Thanks so much.
That's the tagline. It's lovely to have you here.
Thank you.